What's up guys, today we're going to be finally going over how Destiny 2's new firing range works. And first off, we're going to be going over all the functionality of the firing range, so all the buttons, the way it works. Then we'll move into some more technical aspects of it, breaking down the way the numbers work and stuff like that. And finally, we'll be talking about some recommendations I have for potential changes down the road, just to make it a little bit better. But this tool is awesome, you should definitely be using it. I'll be using it a lot for all my videos, as you've already seen, and it's just a great tool. So first, how do you launch this? Well, from the portal, you go to the tower tab, then it's its own launch area, the shooting range right here. You just click that, launch, and it'll take you right to here. And you can get up to all 6 players, so like a raid fire team can get in here, or solo, wherever you want. And there's a lot of things you can do in here. So starting off, the first thing to look at is going to be the enemy types, which is going to be this right here, these 8 selections. So first we have the Dread, get that to spawn in. Then you have the Scorn, finally the Fallen, also the Taken. Then you have Cabal, Hive, Vex, and finally just the Vanguard training, which are just like training bots that just never die. That both have body shots and crits. And then when you're in the actual enemy type, so let's say I want to focus on Cabal, what we can do is swap between the different enemy types within that race. So first we have the miners, which are just the classic red bar. Then we have the regular majors right here. Then we also have like the upgraded major or mini boss, which generally will have a shield attached to them. So I think that would just be kind of like a mini boss. Then we have the true boss right here. And for Cabal, they did name him Carl, which is pretty cool. And then the other thing you can do on top of those 4 selections for minor, major, mini boss, and boss is go over here and spawn in a champion. And you can toggle between all the champions of that race type. So for Cabal, we have Barrier, then Unstoppable. And that is it for Cabal. And you can swap between them as you want to get the one you want. And then with the enemies, if you wanted just one combatant, so you go to select your whatever type you want, come over here and just click on single combatant, and just one will spawn in. If you just want one instead of all like 8 or 10, wherever it is. Or if you want a full wave, you just click this one right here. And that will spawn in all of them. That way you can do whatever testing you need. And one thing about the combatant wave is it does not work with the bosses. When you spawn in a boss, it's always going to just be one. And if I click this button, nothing happens. They'll just spawn in one again, or yeah, one again. But if you go over here and just keep clicking single combatant, they'll spawn more and more. So you can actually get up to 7 bosses at once if you want. And this could be useful for like proccing surrounded, or you know, any perks that require needing multiple enemies nearby to proc them. So that'll be a way to test those perks on a boss. So for the enemies I'll be using a lot for testing, probably just Carl or Greg, which fun fact, I'm not the one who named this ogre Greg on Titan. I think it was Rick, I'm not sure, don't quote me. But for Carl, when they got rid of the planet Titan, or the moon I should say, I went through like every Lost Sector game to find one that I wanted to use for testing going forward, and I found the one on Nessus for multiple reasons back at the time. And I decided to call him Carl because, you know, it's a Colossus, starts with a C. Carl starts with a C. And it just kind of went from there. And it's pretty cool that they put it into the fine range. But that is the 2 I'll probably be using a lot for bosses. I'll be using various other things for perks and stuff like that. And now for the DPS. So in the middle, there is a DPS and a damage number. And then there's also all of these little tablets, which there's gonna be 6 of them, right? So you can have 6 people in here, and if we do damage to whatever target it is, the DPS and the damage will show up here for all of our damage. But then for each individual tablet, there's one for each player. So I'm player 1, I'm the only person in the fire team. This is mine. If we had 2 people in fire team, they would go here, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. So you can do damage with all 6 people in here like a fire team, and this will be the team members, and right here all of the individuals. And we'll talk more about some of the DPS stuff a little bit later, but that is how the DPS works for the fine range. Now moving on to these 3 buttons right here. So first, if we do damage to whatever target, and we have numbers on our tablets and our team DPS numbers. If we want to go and clear it and restart, it's this far left button that just resets all of the DPS on everything. And then this middle toggle will turn on the ability for the enemies to actually attack you and play normal. As you see, they're pretty scary. The flinch was so hard, I couldn't even turn it off. And that is how I used to have to test with them shooting back, but now we can just make it so they just stand still. And that is obviously really nice, but if you wanted to test like damage against you, DR, stuff like that, that could be a pretty useful tool. And finally, the third button is just to fully clear the entire arena. So no matter what you have spawned and whatever you have active, it will just completely clear it. And from there, if you wanted to respawn stuff in, you know, boss, you'd go to single. There it is. And if you were in a wave of miners or whatever it is, you would do the combatant wave. And one other button over here is just going to be the toggle for the distance to the target. So if we do that, when we ADS, it says how many meters above them. And then is right here on the left, it already has that, and the enemies always spawn in on like the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 meters. So that is something you can turn on. That's really mostly for PvE, or that's gonna be mostly for PvP players, but it is an option. But for PvE, not that big of deal. So that is all those buttons and all those buttons. Pretty much all the main functionality of the fine range, DPS, all that stuff. But there's a few other things we can do in here. So starting off is if we're on Transcendence and you want Transcendence energy, come over here, fill it up. Even if you're not on Prismatic, you still get the full charge, which is pretty cool. Kind of like the campaign missions. Likewise, we also have a rally flag for all of our ammo and all of our abilities. So really the only other thing left to show off for the functionality is this self-damaging area right here. So if we jump in, it'll just take us to 1 HP, which could be nice for some perks where you need to be red bar to like proc it. So for example, the Hunter sidearm exotic, I can't think what it's called. When you become red bar and swap to a sidearm, you get the damage boost. That'd be a way to proc that perk. But I wish the same would scale with DR. That way you could test DR values in PvE and like buffs like or in different builds like that. So if I jump in here again, as you see, it takes what 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 takes to get me to 1 HP. I wish it would scale with DR. So if, let's say I have like 99% DR, I wish it would just like not do damage to me, so you can actually test that. But as you see, if I store block in here, it's still the same 9 ticks to kill me. So it does not matter what your DR stat is. That'd be more convenient if it was. So testing DR, you're still gonna have to just use the actual enemies, which is a little bit annoying. I wish that would work like that, because it kind of seems to be like the purpose of it. But maybe that's something they can change in the future to make this a little bit better. Now moving into some more of the technical aspects of this area. So mostly focusing on the numbers themselves. So if we go ahead and use a hand cannon, wherever it is, the damage says 62, right? And this will not scale based off the light level of the weapon itself or your armor, your total light. They did really good with that. So for example, I have a 400 sunshot, 65 and 32, put on a 200 sunshot, 65 and 32, which means it does not matter what level your stuff is, it's always gonna hit the same numbers in here, which is very good. If it didn't work like that, it'd be really hard to actually get real testing going. You would have to always be the same light, weapons would have to be the same light for it to actually work. So I'm really glad that they did that correctly. But the thing that does scale damage in here is gonna be the weapon stat. So once again, right now, just using the sniper, 428. Now if I go ahead and put on a full set of weapons, and I now have 192 weapon stat, which will scale the damage of my special by 13.8% to the bosses. If we look at that again, it's now 487. So that stuff does work, which is good. I think that is something that should scale the numbers in here, because that is a part of your build. So going forward for myself, I believe this is what most people will do. I'm sure there'll eventually be just like a norm that everyone establishes, but I think the best way is just have a 200 weapon stat armor set to always use when testing numbers in here, because for most boss fights, you know, you're probably rocking pretty high weapon stat. And so just for consistent testing, I think just rocking 200 for all comparison purposes is probably the way to go. Another thing that does scale in here is if we look at the seasonal weapon boost for the artifact. So obviously with the old weapon, 900 RPM SMG, don't have any of that. It's for 31. And if I go and switch to a seasonal 900 RPM SMG, now as you see, I do have the 6% weapon boost for that slot because it is a tier 3 seasonal weapon. And that will scale up to 32. Obviously that's going to be major rounding errors probably, but that does work also. So the things that will scale the damage numbers are if it's a seasonal weapon based off the artifact and the weapon stat, both of which I think are okay. I'm really glad that they've just made the power level of the weapons themselves not scale the damage. So that is pretty nice. How they calculate the DPS in here is exactly the same way I did, which is just from first point of damage to last and all the damage between that divided by the time, right? So for example, shoot 2 shots as fast as possible. DPS is 1272. Do the same thing, and just wait longer. Obviously, DPS is way lower because I took longer, right? So that is pretty much the exact same way I tested DPS already. And what that does is, if you do 2 mags, it's the 1 mag of damage, reload, 2nd mag of damage, and the time is the time of both mags plus reload, right? And that's pretty much what I already did with like the 1 mag, 2 mag, 3 mag, 4 mag. Some people just did 1 mag plus the reload and just had one number for each weapon. But I always like to break it up into mags because that is how you actually do damage in the game. And obviously, Bungie agrees, it seems. Obviously, this is the best way to code it and the easiest way. But when you're actually playing the game, no one's ending a DPS phase with a reload, right? So the 1 mag plus reload number that a lot of people used, that number, while was easy for just having one number attached to each weapon, you never did that in the game. You never shot a mag of sniper, reloaded, then just stopped shooting. You would always end with a magazine of bullets, right? So that is the way the DPS works in here. So no change at all. Exactly the same way I did it myself. And the final thing I want to show off before I talk about a few improvements I think could really help this place. First is all the DPS and damage numbers are either bugged or just scaled weird. And if someone knows like the super technical reason of this, let me know. I was trying to think about it for like just a few minutes and I can't really figure out why. But for example, with the sniper, you see it's all cleared. Do damage, it says 487. Up here it says 325. So that's obviously less. And the same thing happens for, so if you do this with every weapon type on a boss in here, the numbers up here are 66.6% of this number, which at least it's consistent with every weapon I tried to shoot at the boss. It was the same. So I'm not sure why it's doing that, but as long as it's across the board consistent with everything that you shoot at them, it's not that big a deal. But it's just kind of weird. Like, why aren't these matching up, right? Like, shouldn't this just be the exact number here? I'm not sure. And with the different enemy types, it does change randomly. So on the red bar enemies, I think it was like 62, 63%. Then, you know, it's just different. But for every weapon you shoot at that enemy type, it's always the same ratio from the damage on the actual target to the numbers displayed. So I'm not sure why that is, but as long as it's consistent across the board, there is no issue with testing and comparing things, as long as you're using the numbers on like the same enemy type. And I was thinking maybe it was the fact that they're not using the enemy scaling. So for example, weapons generally do less damage to bosses than like a red bar. And I'm not sure if that's why. That was my thought. And I guess I don't know enough about all the numbers to be able to prove that fact or not. But if I had to guess, that is maybe why. But overall, they should just make it so the numbers that you see are the same that show up in the actual DPS and damage numbers displayed on all the tablets. Now moving over to a few things I think they could change about this place to make it a little bit better. First is, I would like a way to have other enemies spawn in at the same time as the boss. Currently there is no way to do that, right? I can spawn in multiple bosses if I wanted to, but I can't have like a boss and then a bunch of red bars near them. And I think that would be very helpful. So for example, I think the best way to do this would just be having the boss for that enemy type be a toggle just the same way that the champion is. So right now I can spawn in a champion with an entire group of red bars, and I think the same for the boss, just like another button over here somewhere would be pretty ideal. That way for perks that you need to get kills with, you get kills, then go to the boss and use the ×3 whatever perk you're using, right? And I think that'd be really handy for a lot of stuff that requires kills first. Now, what you could do is run a wave of just the red bars, get the perk going by getting kills on the red bars wherever you need to do, then swapping to the boss, and then hopefully the timer will last until they spawn in, shoot them through your ability, wherever it is, and you could make it work that way, but obviously that's not very convenient at all. So I would like a way to have the boss spawn in with other stuff at the same time. Another thing I already talked about was I wish this actually scaled with DR to test DR values. Obviously you can still do that with the enemies shooting at you, but that's not going to be nearly as consistent as something like this that is a tick rate that is very predictable and linear. So I wish that would work. That would be very helpful. And the final thing is, with the entire game being all about like deltas where you're 10 below, 20 below, 10 above, 20 above, etc, etc, I think it would be pretty nice for there to be an option to like scale the delta of this arena. So right now it is just on normal difficulty, and I'm not sure if we can outscale it or not, but I think if there was an option to make it -10, -20, -30, -40, -50, I think that'd be really helpful with the style of all the content in the game now, where that is kind of the way it works. Now, obviously you can do all the math yourself to figure out those values, but I think for the average player, I think that would be very helpful. So for contest mode, where we're -40, I think being able to set it to -40 and actually seeing how the damage would work and how much damage you'd take and make your build around that could be a pretty useful tool. So I don't know if that's something that they could do, but I think that would be very good. And yeah, I think that's going to be it for the Firing Range. Definitely a great tool. I'm super happy that they added it into the game. There's a few things I would personally like them to tweak, but overall this space is really cool. Definitely use it to test your builds, test all of your weapons. I'll be using it all the time in videos going forward. And yeah, like usual, thanks for watching. Catch you next time.